This week's video focuses on case studies and case reports. Before I go into detail about some of the differences between case studies and case reports, some of the major elements for each genre, and some examples, I do want to talk about the advantages of case studies and case reports and why they're so useful in scientific publishing and actually feel really widely used, particularly among clinical practitioners and in the clinical field. This is, it's just to start it off, case studies and case reports are kind of like a hybrid in terms of methodology. They're sort of somewhere in between a quantitative and qualitative study design. It's hard to particularly a case study, it's hard to pinpoint them to either one because they take elements of both. But they serve as great educational tools. So case studies and case reports are used in clinical education, and case studies outside of scientific publishing in other academic avenues are also great educational tools in different classrooms as well. The business field, for example, business management has used case studies for years, the case study approach. So they're great educational tools. Both case studies and case reports allow researchers to generate hypotheses. So if they want to explore a topic, that's why both of these are both genres are very explorative. And if that makes any sense, they explore a topic before designing necessarily a randomized control trial or some more empirical design around a particular topic. Often case studies and case reports allow researchers to collect data on rare issues that can be challenging to explore in traditional empirical research design. And they do generate new observations. So newness and unusualness, if that's a word, are really key parts of topics that are explored or that are published as case studies and case reports in scientific publishing in particular. So let's talk about case reports. A case report is a common way for clinicians to report about an interesting case from their clinical practice. So something unusual, something that's out of the extraordinary, those are all really great candidates for case report. Something that goes against the normal method of treatment, the expected results, and so on. Sometimes a case report, this is where it can get a little confusing. A case report is sometimes described as a case study report or just abbreviated even as a case study. So sometimes in scientific published literature, you might find something labeled as a case study. When you look at it closely, it really resembles more of a case report. And I'll show you an example a little bit later on as well for that. So this can, of course, lead to confusion, right? As case studies follow a particular study design, and case reports really don't. Case reports don't have a particular study design. They just sort of follow, they just describe, observe a particular case and report on it. If several case reports are collated together to compare them, either to find similarities or differences, they're usually called a case series. One of the articles that I'm assigned to read for today explains those in a little bit of greater detail as well. Case reports, case studies, case series, and then another genre I'm going to focus on in just a moment. So general elements of case reports, and I've taken this from an article that I put in the recommended course material section from the Journal of Medical Radiation Sciences. And so most case reports have some sort of abstract. They have an introduction that includes a brief literature review or contextualization of the topic with literature. Then you have a really lengthy, or the lengthiest part is usually the description of the case. Then it usually follows a discussion. A discussion usually follows the description of the case that engages with the relevant literature, so picks up some of the literature from the literature review and adds some more. And then there's usually a summary of the case and a conclusion. And sometimes these elements are called different things, and some journals have different requirements. But those are sort of the general elements that you'll find, even if they're named something else. So let me show you something from Wiley Online Library from the Clinical Case Reports journal, and it lists here all the manuscript categories and requirements, and I just wanted to point out a few of those because I thought they were really interesting. I like number 5, the report is well written in terms of clarity, style, and use of English. Can mean a lot of things, but probably clear writing, clear English, shorter sentence is always good. But I love the number 6. The report has a logical construction, and in parentheses, it would make sense as a telephone referral to a colleague. right? So again, it emphasizes the clinical nature of case reports. Clinicians write those. They're really meant to educate other clinicians, and then potentially, of course, researchers as well who work in this field. Um, and then the other, it follows here, and this is kind of weird with 8 and 9. This wasn't kind of properly formatted on the website. There's screenshots. But it lists here the discussion section explains the case in the context of published information, right? Very common. The conclusions accurately and clearly explain the main clinical message. If you look at the length, they're pretty short. Again, this can vary from journal to journal, but this is a pretty standard. I still want to point out to the end sentence here, which I just love. Brevity is crucial here. If you cannot, and this is about the key clinical message that needs to be less than 50 words. If you cannot summarize your key clinical message in 50 words, you may need to rethink the message you are trying to convey. Okay. So again, brevity, being concise, being clear, having a clear storyline presented in the case report are really important. Here's another example for a description from the Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care. This journal publishes several genres, including, of course, the traditional research article, but also case reports. And so I just want to read this out to you. So new, interesting, and rare cases can be reported. They should be unique, describing a great diagnostic or therapeutic challenge and providing a learning point for the readers. Cases with clinical significance or implications of an education value will be given priority. These communications could be up to 1,000 words, excluding abstract and references, so they're even shorter than the previous one, and should have the following headings, right? And so they go with abstract, unstructured one, you know what this means. You have keywords, you have an intro, a case report, discussion, reference, tables, legends. Often case reports have some lengthy tables as well, and figures attached to it. The manuscript could be of 1,000 words, up to 2 references, and no more than 4 authors. So again, very different from the traditional research article that has usually a lot more than 4 authors, and it's definitely more than 10 references. The purpose of the case report is really to communicate, educate, enlighten the practice community around a particular issue. So a case study, which the term can often be conflated with case report. Case study actually can also focus on one individual, so it can be similar with a case report. In a case report, a case series, we know, can focus on several cases. But a case study, the case in the case study can be one individual, a group, several individuals, or large organizations, or even several organizations. So it could be different cases, not just of one person, but several persons, groups, organizations, and so on. There are lots of different types of case studies. It's almost like you can throw any sort of adjective before the term case study. So I threw a few in here. There's intrinsic case studies, instrumental, collective, exploratory or pilot studies, illustrative case studies, cumulative case studies, explanatory case studies, and there's probably a whole lot more adjectives that exist too. Those are the ones that I found. I'm not going to go into great detail describing these. I believe that intrinsic, instrumental, and collective might have been the one one of the article mentions. So if you're interested in that, look at that article's definition of those. What I want to emphasize is that there are a broad variety of case studies. It's a very diverse genre, and it's very diverse because each discipline or even subdiscipline approaches case studies a little differently. So a case study in business, a case study in sociology, a case study in medicine, they might all look a little different. There's not that much consensus around it. I think the consensus is just based on one article you're reading, is that the term case study sometimes is used when actually it probably would be more appropriate to say case report, particularly in a clinical sense. Because case studies usually, they're often structured in an IMRAD format. I'll go into this in a second. At least the ones in some of the social sciences, where you have an introduction, methods, result, and the discussion in the methodology or method section. Authors clearly identify how they went about collecting all the data they used to come up with their conclusions based on the case. So this comes from one of the articles that I have you read, and I really like this quote. So for case study design, so it really, what's at the heart of a case study is the need to explore an event or phenomenon in depth and in its natural context. So the in-depth and natural context are really pivotal here. So right, it has that sort of observational component in there. And so case studies have what is referred to often in naturalistic design rather than experimental design. So usually researchers don't manipulate too much with a case study because unlike in an experimental design where you have a control group, you have different variables that you manipulate based on your different groups and so on. So very, very different. You're really it's almost like an anthropological approach, so to speak, right? Where you are the observer, observing a group of people, taking notes, and then making some conclusions about them in a very general sense. And there is another study design called single subject design or single subject research design that also sometimes gets called a case study, even though it's different. And in a single subject design or single subject research design, these genres have three distinct stages. You have a baseline stage, you have a stage where the individual is being manipulated, quote unquote, with something like the variable is introduced, and then you have the end stage, or the conclusion stage, where whatever the variable was that was added is taken away again. So there is an experimental kind of element to it, and a manipulative, in a negative sense, but the researcher or researchers manipulate something around the individual, where in case studies you observe the behavior, right? It's really observing the behavior. You don't introduce anything that could change the naturalistic behavior of that particular group, individual, organization, and so on. So let's look at some elements of case studies, and this comes from a website by Western Sydney University on case study structure that I wanted to show you because it clearly so much looks like the IMRAD. But before I go to the table, it is a very diverse genre, right? So it's diverse because almost each discipline has a slightly different approach to it. Case study design and case study structure elements depends on discipline-specific convention, sometimes even on journal-specific convention, right? Some journals want case studies reported in a certain way and others in another way. But what you find, I think, a lot is something that looks similar sort of to the IMRAD format. So you have an introduction with aims, you have a method section, a results section, discussion section, recommendation section, right? So the case study of all the genres discussed in this week is probably the closest to the IMRAD in terms of more of a qualitative research design. Again, I said earlier, quantitative elements can be part of a case study, but traditionally they tend to be more quantitative. I wanted to point your attention to this particular table, again from the article, The Case Study Approach. It's part of your required readings. Just definitions of case study. And there are actually thick, big books written about case study design and case study research. So it's a very, very complex topic, and I'm not doing it really justice going into depth here. I just want you to understand, for the purpose of this class, for the scientific publication piece, for science communication piece of it, that case studies tend to often be conflated with case reports, but they also can be done in a clinical context, and then they tend to usually borrow some of the design from some of the more social science-based or business-based methodologies. But here are some of the definitions of a case study. The case study is both a process of learning about the case and a product of our learning, very eclectical. What I like here, the all-encompassing feature of a case study is intense focus on a single phenomenon within its real-life context, right? And so investigates a phenomenon in depth and within its real-time context, and a phenomenon of some sort occurring in a bounded context, again in a particular kind of context. In-depth study, there we have that word again. And George and Bennett at the end here, an instance of a class of events where the term class of events refers to a phenomenon of scientific interest that the investigator chooses to study with the aim of developing theory regarding causes of similarities and differences among cases of that class of events. Again, pretty abstract. So what I want you to take away from this, two things. One is it's very in-depth, so very detailed. What we in anthropology often call a thick description. If you ever come across that, it's a term coined by, blanking on his name, very famous anthropologist. So an in-depth kind of study of a particular group, individuals, organization, and so on. And then it's in a real life context, right? Real life or bounded context. But in a particular context, this group, organization, people, groups of people are being analyzed in depth. So I want to show you this particular journal called Clinical Case Studies, which is, as the title says here, or the writing says here, the only journal devoted entirely to case studies, and so on. It's from individual, couples, and family therapy, so they're focused on therapy. And here, the journal gives an overview of how they want the particular case studies to be structured: theoretical, research-based for treatment, case introduction, presenting complaints, history assessment, case conceptualization, course of treatment, complicating factors, and so on and so on. So I think this might be one of these cases that some of our writers that we've read today really urge us to come up with some clear language around what we mean, because this looks a little bit more like a case report than necessarily a case study. So just be aware of that you might come across something that's labeled a case study, and it might really be more of a case report, particularly if it's in a clinical context. Not always, but it can often happen. So you could probably make an argument for this being a case study because there's some element of theory in here, case conceptualization. When you look at some of the publications in there, and I've looked at a few, they really look like a traditional case report. I do want to show you, before I go to two examples, just a quick abstract of a case study from the Social Science Journal, International Review for the Sociology of Sport, about, a football club, which I always think is funny, and Anthony May, no relationship to me. So this article utilizes English Professional Football Club, City FC, as a case study to examine the place of football within the globalized economy. That's really the sentence I wanted to show you, and then this case studies that I analyze, and so on and so on. But it's really very kind of using one particular example and relating it to a larger context. This particular football club as part of looking at football within a globalized economy. Does it mean that this can be said about all football clubs? No, but again, it allows, and this is the wonderful thing about case study design, it allows us to come up with some hypotheses to maybe see if there's a need for a larger study, a more organized experimental design, and so on. And then I want to just briefly show you those two samples, one sample case study, one sample case report that I selected for you to look at. So I'm going to click out of the PowerPoint here and go into my files here. This is the sample case report from the Journal of Family Medicine and Primary Care, just so you can see it. And you can take a look at it as well on your own. I suggest you don't have to read every single phrase here very carefully. I just want you to get an idea what a case report looks like. So you have the abstract here, you have the keywords, you have an introduction with some citation, you have a case history, clinical findings, assessment, therapeutic focus, blah, 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 discussion, you have a table here, timeline of the case, you have another table about the particular intervention, some of the things that were done with the client, the way the client was treated, patient consent acknowledgements, and so on, references. And so, again, what is it, 1,000 to 3,000 words, I think, for this journal, so pretty straight to the point, presenting the case of, so it was here in this case study, in the second sentence in this case study. Let me see if I can mark it for you. In this case study, an obese patient was suffering from severe multiple joint pains and shortness of breath, was unable to do this, blah, 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 blah. The treatment was aimed at restoring psychophysiological and physical health of the patient. What I want to make clear here that this is not a manipulation of the case, right? This patient is being treated in this particular way, and then the report is written up after that happened. So it's not they're receiving no treatment, a different treatment, and no treatment at all. So it's different from that single, what was it called again? From the single subject research design. Okay. So this is your case report. If you go, again, this is what it looks like. Take a closer look at it if you like. It's short, just kind of getting an idea for what it looks like. And then the sample case study I wanted to show you comes from what is the journal called? The Journal of Computational and Applied Mathematics. Oopsie. So this might not be in many of our wheelhouses, but anyways, wanted to show this to you. You have an abstract as well, right here. And then you have an introduction, you have some images, you have materials and methods, the data set, the procedure, crazy things that are foreign to me, and lots of tables, results, and discussion. And if you think back to our conversation, remember when we were talking about the discussion section being artificially separated from the results section, as the Finnish author was arguing? Here's an example of a journal that combines results and discussion, at least for this particular case study. And then you have your conclusions. So in a way, this almost looks like an empirical research article in a sense, and it kind of is, but it does follow this sort of case study design, a case study kind of approach as defined by this particular discipline. So again, this is why it's so difficult to really categorize case studies. They can look very different based on each on the discipline they're created in and the journals they're published in. So for the assignment this week, really just focus on what are the advantages of case studies and case reports for science communication, for clinical research. That is really the focus of this professional development corner you have to write with your writing group, rather than having to explain the big differences between these genres, although I do want you to understand them so that you can be critical readers and consumers of case studies and case reports in a scientific context.